Coming up on Bridge City News, former Canadian Prime Minister John Turner has died at the age of 91. Tributes are paid to U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg after her death on Friday. She was 87. And Hickory Street hosts Rib Feast in Lethbridge.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm LAURICE Alexander. Thank you for joining us. Former Canadian Prime Minister John Turner has died Friday evening. The former Liberal Party of Canada leader passed away at the age of 91. Turner led Canada as the country's 17th Prime Minister for just 79 days in the summer of 1984, but spent decades in federal politics. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who became the court's second female justice, died at her home in Washington. She was 87.
Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a diminutive yet towering women's rights champion.
I, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
She became the court's second female justice when she was appointed by President Bill Clinton in 1993.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of...
She was known for digging deep into case records and for being a stickler for following the rules. She was affectionately called the notorious RBG for her defense of the rights of women and minorities. In the most divisive of cases, she was often at odds with the court's more conservative members. But she was perhaps personally closest on the court to Antonin Scalia, her ideological opposite. Ginsburg once explained that she took Scalia's sometimes biting dissents as a challenge to be met.
We were different, yes, in our interpretation of written text, yet one in our reverence for the court.
Ginsburg authored powerful dissents in cases involving abortion, voting rights, and pay discrimination against women. During her time on the court, she struggled with health issues, including bouts with cancer beginning in 1999.
All this talk about tax penalty, it's all beside the point.
In her final years on the court, Ginsburg was the unquestioned leader of the liberal justices, as outspoken in dissent as she was cautious in earlier years. Walter Ratliff, The Associated Press.
She just died? Wow. I didn't know that. You're telling me now for the first time. She led an amazing life. What else can you say? She was an amazing woman. Whether you agreed or not, she was an amazing woman who led an amazing life. I'm actually saddened to hear that. I am saddened to hear that. Thank you very much.
Ginsburg is survived by 2 children, Jane and James, and several grandchildren. In an executive order, President Donald Trump banned U.S. app stores from carrying social media app TikTok and communication app WeChat. This decision follows months of escalating tension in a tech war between the U.S. and China. Existing users can still use the apps if they're downloaded before Sunday, and the experience will degrade without software updates. U.S. President Donald Trump also issued an order giving parent company ByteDance until November 12th to divest its interest in TikTok in the U.S. Billions of dollars have been spent on trying to find a vaccine for COVID-19. Josh Morrison is the executive director of a group called One Day Sooner. It's a group that advocates on behalf of coronavirus challenge trial volunteers. Morrison says thousands are lining up to participate in human trials, which are vital towards finding a vaccine.
The fact that it's a global pandemic makes the value of this research all the higher. And so, the name of our organization is One Day Sooner, is the idea that right now something like 4,000 to 5,000 people around the world are dying each day of COVID. Now, it's likely that if you did these challenge studies in 1,000 people, no one would die. And if you could even save 1 day of deployment of a vaccine or end the shortage, or end the crisis 1 day sooner, that represents thousands of lives saved. And that's an enormous benefit for willing volunteers who understand the risks to participate in studies to achieve.
You can catch the full interview with Mr. Morrison as we discuss the health risks that volunteers are being exposed to. That interview will be coming up next. Hickory Street, a family-owned restaurant in Sterling, will be hosting Rib Feast in Lethbridge this weekend. 10% of the proceeds will be going towards the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen.
We had an amazing first day, so we decided to come out the second day, and we made twice as many racks of ribs because we sold through so many. People have come out in droves, and it's been amazing. We're so grateful. Thank you so much to our supporters. You guys have been phenomenal. You came out before we even got here. You were here, so thank you. We appreciate it. We have tons of food for you, and we're so grateful that you guys keep supporting us. 10% of everything we're doing today is going back to the soup kitchen, which is really what matters here, giving back to the community. So thank you.
I know the owners. They're actually from Sterling, which is our neighboring town from Raymond, and we drove in about 25 minutes to support local. We also came out to support Hickory Street since they're giving 10% of their proceeds to the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen.
I waitress in the restaurant, and sometimes I help make food in the kitchen. I have these customers that are always really funny, and they come in and they support me a lot.
Yeah, the ribs are fantastic to die for. You wouldn't believe it. If you can eat that, you're a big boy.
It's been insane. Like, I've met so many people are so nice. It couldn't be better.
BCN was at the Lethbridge Farmers Market today, and we featured Campbell & Sons garlic.
We are a local pesticide, herbicide-free, hardneck garlic growers. We grow two main varieties right now. One is called Dugansky, which is a whiter, oilier garlic, and the other is the true Russian purple or Russian red. It is a spicier, hotter, bigger garlic. Yeah. This year's been a very interesting year, as most people know, because of the COVID thing. Just with restrictions and stuff like that, people are farther away, so you have to really kind of reach out and grab people as they walk by. You know, it's not before as where they were walking right by your booth that you could get their attention easier. And it's just a different year. There's a different feeling to it. Everybody's a little anxious, a little concerned, you know. So, but the good thing is it's forcing more people to stay local and buy local, so which is helping us to in the long run. People are conscious of that because they touch things and they go, oh, I shouldn't touch that. It's like, yeah, people are learning more. It's going to take a while, I think, before people understand the true impact of it and how it does. But it is, you know, like you say, it has impacted sales a little bit, but what can you do? We have to carry on. So just sales are down a little bit, like I said, noticeably, you know, more than the last few years for sure. But yeah, like I said, we've opened up a store. So we've picked up a little bit of the slack that way. In our store, we we're shooting for about 20 to 25 other local vendors, so it is more of a community style thing, and everything is trying to be within the 100 to 150 mile radius, so we say as local as, you know, as we can. Obviously some of the fruit and stuff like that is local, but there's only so much we can grow here that's not in a greenhouse, and we're nothing against greenhouses, but our stuff is field grown and stuff like that, so it's a little bit different. Yeah.
September is Alopecia Awareness Month. BCN spoke with one Lethbridge senior who talks about her journey with alopecia and why she chooses to rock her bald look with pride.
My hair started thinning probably about 5 years ago, and it got thinner and thinner, and I had a doctor at the clinic who was specialized more in dermatology, I guess, and she referred me to a specialist, a Dr. Lowe, which I couldn't get in for about 6 months. By then I was totally bald. I did have hair, and I had them permed, and I had colors, and it's just nice. I don't have to do any of that anymore. Well, I've had men come up and tap me on the head and say, hey, look at here, and he'd lift his hat up, and he's bald too, and think, you know, and then joke about it. And I mean, it doesn't bother me. You know, if it did, I'd probably wear a wig or a hat. I had a woman approach me when I was shopping in Medicine Hat at the co-op, and she came up and she says, I have to admit how brave you are. And I said, what do you mean? She said she lifted her hair and she was totally bald. Sometimes I look at women with beautiful hair and I say, oh, I could just go and rip her hair out and put it on my head. But, but no, I don't miss it.
Recapping one of her top news stories, former Canadian Prime Minister John Turner died Friday evening. The Liberal Party of Canada leader passed away at the age of 91. Turner led Canada as the country's 17th Prime Minister for just 79 days in the summer of 1984, but spent decades in federal politics. And a look at weekend weather. Widespread smoke this weekend means a special air quality statement remains in effect for Lethbridge and area. For tonight, expect cloudy skies with 30% chance of rain and a low of 12. Tomorrow it should be cloudy with a 30% chance of showers early in the morning, along with a high of 19. After the break, BCN's Jeanette Roche speaks with Josh Morrison, the executive director of a group called One Day Sooner, which advocates for the health risks of volunteers for COVID-19 trials. That interview is up next, but first, here's what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge Arts Days 2020 is taking place September 24th to the 27th. This is an annual celebration held in conjunction with provincial and national culture days. This year's events and activities will be available online as well as in person, with physical distancing requirements being observed. Connect with artists in our community and come celebrate the arts in Lethbridge. For more information, visit artslethbridge.org. Lethbridge's Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Mondays and Wednesdays from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. behind Nicholas Sharon Arena. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/rovinggyms. Bring your lunch and enjoy beautiful live music at the same time. Come out October 2nd to the First Friday Lunch and Listen concert series, featuring performances by the University of Lethbridge Conservatory of Music in Cass's Community Room beginning 12:15 p.m. and ending at 1. First Friday events are an initiative brought to you by the Heart of Our City Committee. For a full listing of upcoming events, visit firstfridaylethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Since the outbreak of COVID-19, there have been billions of dollars spent in research and development of a vaccine. But can we trust what's produced? And when it is developed in such a rush, can we really trust the whole process and those who are developing it? Josh Morrison is the co-founder and executive director of One Day Sooner, an organization that advocates on behalf of COVID-19 challenge trial volunteers. Welcome to BCN, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
Now, earlier this year, you were looking for volunteers for human trials to find a COVID-19 vaccine. What has the response been like?
Well, so it's been really incredible. So our organization advocates for human challenge volunteers, which is a special type of test for vaccines or treatments that actually involves deliberately exposing people to infection. And so that's unusual, and we haven't been doing that yet, though there are several groups that are developing these trials. So we've had over 36,000 people in 160 countries who've said that they would be interested in being in these human challenge trials, and I'm one of those people.
So what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria for each participant?
So no trial has been officially approved yet. So what I'm about to say is a prediction, and it's not, we don't know for sure. But I think the first trials are going to be really restricted of a challenge trial for COVID-19. So the World Health Organization gave some recommendations, and they said that the first trial should have people only who are 18 to 25 and in really excellent health. And I'm actually 35, so that would mean that I wouldn't be able to participate. No, I think based on what the risks are, I think 18 to 40 might be a better idea than 18 to 25, but I would expect that the first of these human challenge trials are probably going to be restricted to 18 to 25 or possibly 18 to 30.
How about human challenge trials involving maybe seniors, people over the age of 65?
So I think that that's unlikely to happen unless, at least at first. I think the world where something like that would happen would be a world where we have very effective treatments and we're testing a vaccine that we think is going to be very effective. And even then, I think it'd be unlikely. And that's because the risks, a disease that has significant risks at any age, and it can kill people at any age. But someone who's, something like age 20 to 30, their chance of dying if they're infected by COVID might be 1 in 15,000, for example. But the risk of someone who's over 80, their risk could be 10%. So the risk goes up exponentially. And so I think that's why it's such a restricted age range. And I do think for the foreseeable future, certainly for the next 6 months, we shouldn't expect to see people older than say 50, certainly older than 60, be in such a challenge trial.
So Josh, once the volunteers have been infected, where do they go to be isolated? Is it at home or maybe a special facility?
No, it's at a special facility, and that's to make sure that no one who hasn't consented to being exposed to infection is getting infected in this trial. So it's in biocontainment facilities that have a very high standard of biosecurity. So there's only a certain number of those facilities that exist throughout the world. Something like 60 of them are in the US, maybe 20 or so in Europe. I believe Canada has one or two of them that would be suitable for this purpose. So it's going to be a special facility, and that's where the exposure to the infection would take place. It would be in kind of a nasal dropper, kind of like an eyedropper with the virus for your nose, and then you would go right from that to this isolation, where you would be for probably something like 2 to 3 weeks until it was very certain that you were no longer infectious.
How much of a health risk, however, are these volunteers being exposed to?
Well, so I think that what I would say is that it's meaningful, and it's definitely a risk that no one should take lightly, or that no one should, try at home or something like that. But at the same time, it's, by all the data we have, is a lower risk than risk that we let people accept in other circumstances. Like, for example, kidney donation, which is about a 1 in 3,300 chance of death, or childbirth, which in the United States is about a 1 in 6,500 chance of death. And so by comparison, like I said, for that young population, that might be 1 in 14,000. And then that's, if you take out the unhealthy people, it would be lower. So there is real uncertainty about COVID, but, by everything that we know, it's the type of risk we let people accept in other circumstances.
To what degree could the human challenge trials potentially speed up the timeline to get a vaccine?
So I think that we have to think about two different vaccines. The first thing to know is that it's going to take some time to set up the human challenge trials. You need to do what's called an infectious dosing study first. So I don't think we'll be testing vaccines before the end of the year, or maybe at the very tail end of this year we might be able to start testing vaccines. Once you can start testing them, you can, from the time you start infecting the person to the time you get a result, could be as little as a month. So you could really learn a lot. And that's not, you need to still test a vaccine in thousands of people so that you can make sure that they're safe. But that early signal of effectiveness could be very helpful and could speed up deployment by months. Now, that's probably not going to be soon enough for the candidates that are already being tested in these enormous phase 3s, like Moderna's or Oxford's or Pfizer's. But for other things like Merck's or Johnson & Johnson, or all of the more than 100 vaccines that are in development, challenge trials could be crucial to getting that second generation of vaccines that will hopefully be, instead of maybe 60% effective like the first ones will likely to be, might be 80 or 90% effective, or might not require a booster shot, might be easier to distribute, things like that.
Now, part of the debate is whether it is ethical to intentionally infect someone with COVID-19. What are your thoughts?
So first, the important thing to know, and something I didn't really know before I started doing this work, is we do these types of infection studies in other contexts. We do infection studies for malaria and flu and RSV, which is another respiratory disease, dengue fever, typhoid, and cholera. So this isn't unique. Now, what is unusual is for most of those diseases, not for flu and not for RSV, but for malaria and typhoid and cholera, we have drug treatments that we can feel confident, once you take that treatment, you're not going to, it's very unlikely to die of malaria, which we don't have yet for COVID. One of the ways this could be useful is helping to test some of those therapies, to get better treatments and therapies. But I think the difference here is that, COVID is more dangerous. But the fact that it's a global pandemic makes the value of this research all the higher. And so, the name of our organization is One Day Sooner, is the idea that right now something like 4,000 to 5,000 people around the world are dying each day of COVID. Now, it's likely that if you did these challenge studies in 1,000 people, no one would die. And if you could even save 1 day of deployment of a vaccine, or end the shortage, or end the crisis 1 day sooner, that represents thousands of lives saved, and that's an enormous benefit for willing volunteers who understand the risks to participate in studies to achieve.
Josh, what really motivates somebody to take this on? They're not being paid. We're talking about volunteering, correct?
So, usually in challenge studies, people do get paid for participation. Most of the volunteers who've signed up, in our study, basically, what we've said is, look, you're going to need reimbursement for lost wages and expenses. You're going to need to make sure that people's long-term health, that there's long-term follow-up and things like that. But that's, that's not people's motivation is to be paid. People have different motivations. Not 36,000 people aren't all going to think the same thing. But I think, what a lot of people say, and that's something that I feel, is a desire to feel empowered to be fighting this virus and to be doing something useful during this terrible pandemic. That's a really strong motivation. And I think people also talk about, wanting to protect their friends and family is another reason people do this. And a lot of people have a deep, or volunteers or people who are part of the medical field or the biomedical field. They know about these studies, they know more about this, and they want to be contributing to science and be part of the solution and not just be passively accepting what's happening.
Let's talk about what's happening in other countries around the world when it comes to a potential vaccine for COVID-19. Josh, Russia's come out in August. They declared that they had approved a vaccine for COVID-19. And in Israel as well, they're talking about some of their labs. They're fairly close as well. Have you had an opportunity to be involved in either of those?
So we definitely haven't been involved. And I would say about the Russian vaccine, it's easy to approve a vaccine if you don't wait to see if it works or not, right? Because there's a number of vaccines that have evidence that they cause an immune response. But we don't know if that immune response is actually going to translate to reduced infection. And we also, you need to test a vaccine in thousands of people to make sure that it's safe before you can really deploy it. And I think those steps are important. And so I do think that, by all accounts, what Russia is doing is misguided and overly hasty. I also think there's been recent indications that some of the data they've been using that have been published, even in very small studies that they've published, or maybe have some issues with them as well. So I do think that, yes, we all want a vaccine, and we certainly want a vaccine soon, but we want something that has really strong scientific evidence and that we can feel confident in giving to the public.
Can you explain how the process actually works as well? Developed in the lab, and then when you go to trials, do you start off with mice, maybe make your way up to pigs, monkeys, before you make your way to human beings? How does that work?
Yeah, so usually, I'll first kind of start with the way things usually work, and then how things are maybe a little different for COVID because of the urgency. So usually you would test a vaccine in what's called an animal model. So in a chimpanzee, I think lately the best animal model for COVID in some ways is actually supposed to be Syrian hamsters, apparently. So usually you test in the animal, then you could do what's called an animal challenge. So you give the virus to the animal and after giving the vaccine. And then if that looks like it works, you test maybe in 30 or 40 people in what's called a phase 1 study to make sure, that any huge safety issues that you can spot that right away. And if that looks good, you expand out to maybe 100 people or so, maybe a bit more, in a phase 2 study, which is testing both that level of safety in a different population, maybe testing a couple different doses, and then also is testing for what's called immunogenicity. Does it generate an immune response? And then finally, if that all looks good, then you would go to these what's called phase 3 of testing in thousands or tens of thousands of people. And that's both, what you do there is what's called a randomized control trial. You take half your people in the group who are tested, and you give them the vaccine, and you take half and give them a placebo, and then you see, do the people who get the vaccine, do they have fewer infections rather than the placebo? And you just have to wait for people to get infected naturally. And so, you need something like maybe a couple hundred infections throughout your study to have a decent sense of if a vaccine would work if it was going to be about 50% effective. You might need a few fewer infections if it was less than that. Now, the difference with COVID is these things are moving much faster. So a lot of these vaccines that are being tested, they didn't start with the animal model before they went into humans. They did those two things simultaneously. Or, if you look at the Oxford study, which is the drug that's going to be produced by AstraZeneca, that was the first drug to get into phase 3 studies. So in some ways, they're moving the quickest. And they combined their phase 1 and phase 2 study, and then they also combined a phase 2 and phase 3 study. So these things are kind of compressed, and things are moving a lot faster than they normally would.
Josh, some people suggest that intentionally infecting healthy volunteers with low doses of the COVID-19 virus could help create herd immunity, which could then potentially make the pandemic easier to maintain or manage. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so first I'll say that's not our position. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. Our organization is trying to test the drugs and vaccines by doing this. This idea, I generally, I basically think that trying to deliberately infect people just as a way of getting herd immunity, I would worry about that for two reasons. First, for the safety of the people who are being infected directly, but more importantly, because I don't know if then they would spread it to other people who aren't going to be safe. And of course, anyone who's trying this, I'm sure they would say, well, look, we're going to isolate effectively, but you can't know that. And I think that there are reasons to be making, I think it's good to be thinking of creative solutions, but I also think it's good to be scientifically driven. I think the better way, there's an interesting article in the New England Journal of Medicine recently that talks about how people wearing masks frequently and social distancing might reduce the viral load that the average person who is infected is getting, and might therefore lead to less severe disease. So I would say that generally people should be wearing masks, doing their social distancing. If that means then that the people that are infected are getting lower doses and are more safe, that's a good thing. I would be very skeptical of the idea of deliberately infecting people just so they'd have immunity in the future, in part because we don't know what the immunity is going to look like, how long it's going to last, and what effects it might have. That's actually a good reason to do challenge studies. Is one thing we're working on is to develop a reinfection study to challenge people who've already been infected by the virus, and that can help us understand the immune response better and better guide some of these social policy questions.
Do you work with only certain companies to test their vaccines?
So our organization, again, like I said, there's no studies that have been approved yet to test a vaccine with a challenge study. Oxford has said they're interested in doing challenge studies, though that might just be to create the model to do the infectious dosing study, not necessarily for their own vaccine. Our group advocates on behalf of challenge volunteers. That's our goal. And so, basically what I think challenge volunteers want is to get the most and best vaccines developed and available for people around the world throughout, but regardless of what country they're a part of or how much they earn or anything like that. And so, we want to be helping any vaccine developer that could find this useful. So we do collaborate and discuss some of these things with particular manufacturers or trialists. We've had discussion, we have collaborative discussions with Oxford, like I mentioned, but also with the NIH and Johnson & Johnson. But we're definitely willing to work with any group that's developing vaccines to try to get great and effective and useful challenge studies to move things forward as quickly as possible.
Josh Morrison, co-founder and executive director of One Day Sooner. Thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you.
Raising a child with disabilities comes with challenges and victories. Throw in a global pandemic, and those challenges increase exponentially. Joining me now today is Dr. Edna Jacoto SM. She's the chair of family support for children with disabilities and a proud mom of 4 daughters, one of whom has Down syndrome and just turned 17. Dr. Edna Jacoto SM, welcome back to BCN.
Thank you, Hal. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Edna, one of your daughters is actually home from high school because of a recent outbreak here in Lethbridge.
Yes, she is. We got the text and the email last night, and so we had to scramble to get in touch with 811 to try to book a test for her. And the school has been amazing. They phoned right away to find out if everything was okay, and they just gave us the details. And then they phoned again today just to make sure that everything was fine and how schooling is going to roll out. But we are not quite sure yet because they are ready to teach and everything is online for her, but we have to be with her when she's studying. But since she's supposed to be in isolation, we are not quite sure how that's going to look like right now. So we still have to work on the details about how to be able to support her. She has her EA ready to go, but it's our end that we are trying to work out the details.
Now let's discuss parenting a child who has a disability or is differently abled. Tell me about this journey and what it's been like for you and your family.
I think initially it was a bit of a surprise because we didn't know that we're going to have her with the disability. But I think that, with time, you get to understand more about the condition, and then you learn to appreciate just the strengths that she has. But I'm not going to say that it's been an easy journey. It's a challenging journey. It stretches you as an adult. It stretches you as a human being. But I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Now, when you were told that your daughter had Down syndrome, what were your thoughts and feelings about it initially?
I think it was shock because we didn't know, and fears about how life was going to be like because I didn't know much about Down syndrome at the time. But then as time went on, we sort of knew that it was going to be okay. We knew it was going to be a lot of work, but we knew that it was going to be okay. Now, let me backtrack a bit. One of the reasons that we found out was that she had a heart condition when she was born because her physical features were not very consistent since she's dark skinned, because most whites who get it here, it's more visible. But because she's dark skinned, you needed to have experience to be able to identify it. So they weren't quite sure, but they suspected because of the heart condition. So once they did the genetic testing and we were clear, that we knew that, okay, we know what we are dealing with now. So it's been lots of up and downs, but I think that we are okay with it, and she's doing amazing well. So.
Now, Edna, you have 4 daughters. What is the family dynamic like? And more importantly, do you see any time in the bathroom?
I like that question. Well, family dynamics. Okay, so our oldest is 21, soon to be 22. And so she has been a really great big sister. And the 2 younger ones will tend to play together. And our daughter, she's the second one. So she's very independent. Let me just put it that way. She's super independent in the sense that she likes to do things by herself. But when she needs help, sometimes she doesn't want to ask, except when she sees a bug, like she sees an ant crawling, then she screams, "Help!" But other than that, yeah.
Now, the COVID-19 measures and restrictions have probably been a challenge for you on many different levels. Now, what have you done to ensure your daughter is safe and is understanding of the situation, your child who has Down syndrome?
Well, we've done several things. First of all, she needed to understand what was going on. Initially, she didn't quite understand why she couldn't go to school. So when schools were shut down, we told her she couldn't go to school. And I think she didn't quite understand. So she likes to get her stuff ready the day before school. So she sets out her clothes and gets her backpack ready. The night before school, she even gets out her lunch bag and packs her lunch. So when we told her she couldn't go to school, I think she was a bit confused. And then when we told her that we had to go pick up her stuff from school, she thought she was going back to school. So she decided to pack her lunch bag. And I said, well, yeah, it's not that kind. We are just going to pick up your stuff. So after we came home and they started online schooling, I think she understood that she couldn't go back to school for a while. And so we explained to her, the school explained to her, and we tried to take her out on walks because she couldn't have any programming. We usually hire someone to help us on a private basis, but that person couldn't come into the house because of COVID, and her programming through an agency was cut short too. So we had to get creative in trying to do things just to get her engaged. And that was a bit of a challenge because my husband and I were both working from home. So trying to work from home and then make sure we engage her was a bit of a challenge.
Now, when everything was shut down during the pandemic, were any family support programs available to you and your family?
Yes and no. No, in the sense that she used to go to a program in town every Friday, and that was shut down. They tried Zoom, but it wasn't the same. She just wasn't as engaged as she would have been. And then she was involved in Special Olympics that was shut down. She couldn't do that too. So everything was taken away, just like everybody else. But I guess with her, it was more challenging because she doesn't talk very much. So we had to constantly try to probe to find out what's going on. And she shut down completely because she likes routine. She knows when she wakes up, she goes to school, comes home, and she has that routine. So she shut down initially. Throughout the summer, she actually didn't want to communicate much. But once the programs opened up a little bit in July, things got a bit better.
What have you heard about other families and how they've been impacted, other families who have disabled children, how they've been impacted by this virus and all of the COVID-19 measures?
I think that the impact comes in, well, depending on the nature of the disability. So if your child has very complex needs, it's obviously more difficult because then you have to get workers in. And so the government was very flexible in allowing parents to try as much as possible to customize their programs because there are regulations in place regarding whom you can hire to work in your home. Family members couldn't help you, but they were very flexible enough in agreeing to allow parents, upon request, to be able to make those changes so family members could help if people couldn't come into the home to help them.
Now, you are also the chair of the Lethbridge Christian School Parent Council. What support is there for children with disabilities right now?
Okay, so right now, I think that depending on their needs, if the kids are inside the school, they are able to support them. But I'm not quite clear on what is happening with kids who are not at school right now. Yeah, I still have to get clarification on that. But with kids who are in the school, they do have support.
Now, Edna, do you see any potential problems down the road or even right now when it comes to schools and how they've reopened, even during the pandemic?
I think that it's a very difficult situation and a complex one because on one hand, I think schools are good for the mental health of our children because, I could see even firsthand that it really affected my girls because they couldn't socialize with their friends. So that affected them. But on the other hand, we know that when they are exposed to other students, there's a potential to have that outbreak. So from my perspective, I think it's a very, very difficult situation, but we cannot live in a society that doesn't have any risk. So provided they are able to manage it, I think I'm okay with it. Personally, I'm okay with them going. But of course, this wouldn't work for every family. There are some parents who would choose to homeschool their kids. And I'm so thankful that in our province, that option exists for parents. So whichever one you choose, they are able to support you.
Let's talk about your daughter who has Down syndrome again for just a moment here, Edna. What kind of independence does she have now that you can really enjoy in life?
Oh my goodness. She can do things by herself, like she can go to the bathroom by herself. She doesn't need anyone to help her to go to the bathroom. When she's coming back from school, we drive her in the morning. When she's coming back, she comes home on the yellow bus. She gets off at her stop most of the time, and then she walks home. She's able to eat on her own. She can navigate the iPad technology more than I can. And those are skills that, I am so thankful for that she has those skills.
I mean, like most kids, she probably has hopes for her future. Has she talked to mom and dad about what she'd like to do when she grows up?
She doesn't say very much, so you have to prompt her. So next year she's going to turn 18, which is a big transition year, adult year for her. So we had so many plans in the spring to put in effect just to get her preparing for that stage. But unfortunately, because of COVID, all those plans were cut short. So we have to wait. And then just as things open up and we're ready to get things into motion, she's in isolation. So it's been up and down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride, definitely. Edna, what advice would you offer parents who are struggling with raising a child with a disability?
I think, first of all, you have to see them as any other human being. I think you have to have that perspective that they don't have a deficit. That is just who they are. They have challenges in life. So you have to just accept them as human beings and treat them as human beings. Secondly, you have to see what they have to offer. You know, they may not have certain cognitive skills, they may not have certain physical skills, but maybe a smile. Just look for the good in what they have, because I personally believe that everyone has something to offer and they have something. I mean, she has enriched my life so much. I don't know how my life would have been without her. I've gotten to know lots of people that have made such a big difference that I wouldn't have known but for her. So I would say that just look at the positive, and when you are having a bad day, ask for help. It is so important because the emotional and physical strains of raising a child who has so many challenges, it can be overwhelming, but it's important to know that there is help out there, so you can talk to your caseworker, talk to family members, get a support group around you. And a lot of the groups that, kids with special needs, they have different groups for different kinds of disabilities, if I should put it that way. So reach out to people and talk to people. It may look challenging, but you can overcome. And last of all, just take care of yourself. I think self-care is so important. Just get out, take a walk. It's not expensive. It doesn't cost money to get outside and enjoy the outdoors. So just get out there and enjoy the outdoors. Clear your head and talk to people. Yeah.
Amen to that. Edna, let's also talk about your faith and your relationship with God and how important that is, especially as you navigate through a pandemic and raising a child with a disability.
Oh my goodness. I think that has been the thing that has gotten me through all the challenges, because it's not easy. And so my faith actually has strengthened me in the sense that when I face challenges, I know that, I may not know what lies ahead, but I can lean on God and know that, He's always there, even when it seems like the sky is falling. He's always there to just see me through whatever challenges that I'm going through. And also, I have a very strong faith family that have been very, very supportive, and that has always helped. And also, I think that um, having a child with challenges drives you to ask questions. And if you don't look at the right place for the answers to those questions, your faith can be shaken. And that was what happened to me, because initially I was looking for answers. And then I realized that it's not a bad thing. I mean, having a child with needs is not a curse. You didn't do anything wrong. That is just who they are. And so when you have that understanding by getting into the word and knowing the word, it really, really helps. So I'll just encourage people that, don't look at the wrong places for answers to your questions. Just make sure that if you're a person of faith, get into your word, because you will never know what you will find every day that will strengthen you. That has always kept me going, because I try to get into the word as much as I can on a daily basis. Sometimes it's just one verse, and we have YouVersion app, right? So you can just look at the verse of the day and just think about it during the day. And that really, really helps.
Amen. Well said. Dr. Edna Jakota Assem, Chair of the Family Support for Children with Disabilities, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
As our scientific abilities continue to advance, it is becoming possible to erase traumatic memories from our brains. Some believe this has great potential to help, but others, however, who see some ethical challenges with this. Joining me now to talk about it is Dr. Jeff Zwierig. He's an astrophysicist and a senior research scholar with Reasons to Believe. It's an organization which combines science together with faith. Jeff, welcome to BCN.
Enjoy being here. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Is it actually possible now to wipe out traumatic memories with technology? And how does that process actually work?
Well, as I understand it, it's not possible to actually wipe out the memory, although we do seem to have the capacity to kind of remove some of the physiological effects. So, for example, if you had a traumatic memory and now you have trouble seeing dogs, if you will, or when dogs come around, you get anxious and very disturbed, you can actually do things to eliminate the response to that, even though you can't wipe out the memory, the traumatic experience with the dog.
Could this possibly help someone who's been sexually abused as a child in the past, or perhaps someone who was traumatized by a terrible car accident?
That, I think, is one of the very interesting outcomes of this research, is that it does look like we can actually help people who've been in traumatic experiences and those traumatic experiences drive a lot of how their body responds to things, that we can actually help them dissociate the traumatic response and to be able to live a more healthy, more functional life that isn't driven by the traumatic experience.
Now, we form memories each and every day, Jeff, and I would venture to guess that these memories actually create part of our identity, our personality. So why do we really want to mess with them?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think we ought to be incredibly careful about how we do this, because how our mind works and what we think, it's a very complicated process and system, if you will. And so we do want to be very careful about how we go in and manipulate it, because we actually could cause a lot of unwanted side effects if we're not very careful how we do that.
Now, do memories help us decide what is morally right and what's wrong?
I think the standard or a moral code helps us decide what's right or wrong, but certainly our memories play into that because, you know, anytime I'm deciding right or wrong, I don't want to go have to look up a book and remember the code. I actually have it in my mind so that I can remember it. And so if we want to make sure that we don't hinder our ability to recall things so that we can make those decisions in the moment rather than having to always go look things up, if you will.
Erasing a horrible abuse experience is one thing. But would people then use this to erase an embarrassing moment? Let's say they did something at a Christmas party that they're really not proud of?
I can't see that wouldn't be done. You know, this seems like a technology that has great potential, but any technology that has great potential for good can also be used for detrimental purposes. And so if you can erase the bad effects of a traumatic experience in the past, you can also erase the inhibitions that would come from having done something embarrassing, so that even though you remember the event, you wouldn't be embarrassed by it, if you will.
So what are some of the other potential drawbacks, as you see them, to erasing bad memories?
I think there's just a part of this that we need to be careful when we're working with a very complicated system. You know, I do a lot of work on cars and other things, and I can imagine driving my car down the road and you know, something happens and now there's something flapping inside the car and it's making a really annoying noise. And I could just take a very simplistic approach of saying, oh, let's just go remove that bolt and throw it away. It's rattling around. Well, that bolt probably did something else. And so if I don't fix it right, I'm going to cause other problems. And so that's what I see tinkering with memory. We've got to be very careful that we might be able to do something very good to help people that have very traumatic experiences. And I think that would be beneficial. But if we're just kind of tinkering around with people in kind of the ordinary aspects of life, we could very easily introduce some unwanted effects. And those are going to be very hard to predict ahead of time, simply because the human mind is such a complicated piece of equipment.
Do our traumatic memories maybe serve us in any way? In other words, do we need negative experiences to really learn from them?
It really does seem that. I know a lot of how I behave in a situation is informed by how things have happened in the past. There are things that I just instinctively, it's like my body responds and says, oh, be cautious, be careful here. And so what's happened in the past helps me navigate in the moment of the day, because what there's kind of this idea that, well, I'll just kind of think logically and work through everything. And the reality of it is I don't have time to do all that in the moment. And so those past experiences where, hey, this worked well, ooh, this worked poorly, inform me and allow me to make those decisions that I'm confronted with each and every day. And I have to make a decision on the spur of the moment.
So how do we really learn from a bad relationship if we can't even remember it? I'm thinking we're going to be repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, I think that's right. I'm kind of reminded of what the Bible says, that the Bible encourages us to think on the things that are honorable and true and pure and right, because as we do that, we're reinforcing that that's the way we're going to behave in the future. So if we don't have those bad memories, we can't learn from them to avoid them in the future. In the same way that having good experiences help inform us and make good choices in the future. And so I think we just want to be very careful about trying to remove memories. And I will make this comment. As of right now, I'm not aware of any ability to remove the memories are there. What we can do is dissociate some of the physiological effects of, say I'm terrified of spiders. I can remove the physiological fight or flight response that comes with that so that I can make a more informed decision, so that I can think and behave rationally in the moment. I can't actually get rid of the traumatic memory. It's still there. It's just how does it influence me in this particular instance?
Do we really need the past to give us proper perspective on the present? What are your thoughts?
I think the past is an incredibly important thing. It does help us understand what's going on in the moment. And with memories, again, I think there's this tendency to think of just the memory and that's all that's important. But there's a whole lot that goes into the memory. There's how your body responds. Did you think about it well? Did you think about it poorly? Have you gone back and rethought about it in light of the truth? All of those past things inform what I do each and every moment of every day. And so I think going in and tinkering with our memories and how we respond to them can have a lot of impact, unwanted or unintentional consequences of what may go on in my decision making each and every moment of each and every day.
I heard that there were some scientists who believe that our memories are often interlocked, one memory together with other ones. So maybe potentially erasing one bad memory, would that affect some of the other ones?
I don't see how it couldn't. Again, our minds are very complicated, and what's going on in the brain when you have a memory is that there's new connections being formed, but those connections are connected to other things. And so if we're trying to destroy one connection or remove one memory, that's going to take those connections away, but that's going to have consequences throughout the brain. And again, a lot of the consequences of that we may not be able to predict ahead of time.
Apparently, even though a memory could potentially be erased, our subconsciousness will still retain the emotions that come along with that bad memory, only now the context of those negative emotions are not there. Do you see that as potentially being problematic?
Yes, it is, because if you've now separated the emotions from the physiological response or the emotions from the event itself, you've got these emotions floating around, but you have no context for being able to process them. I know some people know how to process emotions real well. I struggle with that. And a lot of what helps me process the emotions is being able to think through, remember the events, analyze what happened, and think rightly about it. Well, now if those are separated, I now have no longer any good way of processing those emotions to help them keep from driving my life and make and influence decisions, future decisions, in a detrimental way.
Now, considering that there's so much we do not yet know about how our memory works, is it best to not play God and just learn to cope with traumatic memories?
I think we need to be very careful. And I think to the extent you can cope with traumatic memories using just the tools, like I said, that the Bible talks about, thinking about what's true and honorable and right and pure and lovely, that would be ideal. But what I do see the advantage of this is that sometimes, as try as I may, my head hurts and I can't get rid of it. And so I take aspirin. That helps me deal with the pain so that I can do things appropriately or properly. Well, I do think this sort of therapy would help people who are just paralyzed or unduly burdened by traumatic experiences. It will help them get past the traumatic experience so that they can deal with things in a more healthy way. And I think that's a good benefit, but we need to be careful about using it and thinking it's a miracle cure for every bad experience we've ever had.
Where do you think this field of science will actually go over the next 10 or 20 years?
I'm thinking it will help us understand how the mind actually works. Again, it's a very complicated process of how we think. What does consciousness mean? How do we understand past events? How do we think about future events? How do we feel? And how does that all integrate together? The more we can understand how that works, the more we can actually use that information to help and benefit people. So rather than kind of having it be a black box where I know if I put this little drug in, it does this, the more we understand that process, the better we're going to be able to use it to help people who desperately need the help.
You know, I'm kind of thinking at the same time, instead of removing some of those potential memories, how about implanting some fake memories? Like Total Recall, that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, redone, I think, with Colin Farrell. How about we plant in a memory of I was in a tropical vacation somewhere, you know, instead of actually paying the big bucks to go there?
Well, yeah, it does seem like there's some capacity to do that, and people who've been involved in this research can show that you can actually convince people they were involved in committing a crime that they didn't actually commit. And so there are techniques and processes, even without using the drugs, brain function inhibiting drugs, that you can use to do that. And so we'd like to think, oh, if I just have all these memories of idyllic environments, that'll be great. But the reality of it is you've got these memories that aren't connected with what actually happened. And anytime we obscure the way things really work, that often works to our detriment. And so while it may seem like it'd be great and a good time, again, that's almost certainly going to have negative consequences later.
Dr. Jeff Zwerig is an astrophysicist and a senior researcher scholar with Reasons to Believe. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.